Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello. It's now been just over a week since another U.S. citizen, Alex Pretti, was shot and killed by ICE officers who once again put on full display their ineptitude. And that's my being kind, by the way. The aftermath of Alex Pretti's murder continues to feature the intellectually inept, buying into and tossing around every fake claim, meme, video they can hear from Trump or people in his administration or find in some effort to justify the actions of ICE. Some of those memes claim that, and you've seen the guy dressed in drag, totally over-the-top flamboyant. They're saying, that's Alex Pretti. We've all seen them, hopefully deleted them as well. Well, here's the reality of this situation. The man in those photos is actually a guy named Kyle Wagner. He lives in Minneapolis, and he supports the Antifa cause. So let's stop with those memes right there. Another lie about Alex Pretti was that he was fired from his nursing position at the area VA hospital. Reasons for the firing, they've ranged from unwanted contact with patients to predatory actions against patients. And if you look back on your social media page, you see people posting about Pretti being fired from the hospital. How many different hospitals did he work at? Almost every posting has a different hospital name. It was the Minneapolis VA hospital. The union representing the nursing staff at that VA hospital said in a statement that Pretti was employed as a nurse on the day that he was murdered. This past week clearly demonstrated that MAGA is totally incapable of any kind of independent thought. They come up with an ending and try to find a story that fills in the blank. That sheep syndrome even saw MAGA go after right to carry, which Alex Pretti had the totally legal right to do. U.S. Supreme Court, by the way, confirmed that with 2-9-0 rulings, and as you would assume, trashing right to carry did not sit well with the numerous gun organizations, the Trump-supporting gun organizations. Seen poll after poll revealing that what's being perpetrated by ICE is not supported by the vast majority of Americans. Numbers against ICE in the 70 percentile. Now, actually, in a Fox News poll this past Wednesday, they did the demographic breakdown based on political views. Even 26% of Trump voters now say ICE is going too far. I thought to take a look. In the rush of everything, you even might have missed this. The Customs and Border Protection did a initial report on the shooting of Alex Pretti. I'll read some of it here. It's relatively short, but there's one key point I want to bring to your attention. I'll read the preamble, I guess I'll call it. The following statement pertains to an in-custody death that occurred on Saturday, January 24th, 2026 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This information is based on a preliminary review by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, Investigative Operations Directorate, IOD, and may be updated and clarified as additional details become available, as being provided to committee, meaning Congress, staff, concurrently with CBP senior leadership to ensure timely reporting. CBP, OPR, IOD established the following information and timeline based on a preliminary review of body-worn camera footage and CBP documentation. I'm going to jump forward a little bit here. At approximately 9 a.m. Minnesota time, a CBPO was confronted by two female civilians blowing whistles. The CBPO ordered the female civilians to move out of the roadway, and the female civilians did not move. The CBPO pushed them both away, and one of the females ran to a male, later identified as 37-year-old Alex Jeffrey Pretti, a U.S. citizen. The CBPO attempted to move the woman and Pretti out of the roadway. We've seen the videos. The woman and Pretti did not move. The CBPO deployed his OC spray towards both Pretti and the woman. CBP personnel attempted to take Pretti into custody. Pretti resisted CBP personnel's efforts, and a struggle ensued. During the struggle, a BPA yelled, "He's got a gun," multiple times. Approximately 5 seconds later, a BPA discharged his CBP-issued Glock 19, and the CBPO also discharged his CBP-issued Glock 47 at Pretti. These are the two officers that were sitting on a desk right now. After the shooting, keyword there, after the shooting, a BPA advised he had possession of Pretti's firearm. The BPA subsequently cleared and secured Pretti's firearm in his vehicle. Let me read that last line again. After the shooting, a BPA advised he had possession of Pretti's firearm. Now, the immediate aftermath of all that was Greg Bravino being shown the door. Borders are Tom Homan taking the lead seat in Minneapolis. Homan admitted the ICE efforts haven't been perfect there, wants ICE actions to be more focused and targeted. And he also revealed that a drawdown plan regarding ICE in Minneapolis has been created. He didn't put any timeline on when it would begin. Donald Trump was asked about that potential drawdown in Minneapolis at the premiere of his wife's documentary, and he basically said, no, we're not going, we're not leaving, we're there, ICE is there, we're staying. Well, that didn't take long. Took Trump only a day to kneecap Tom Homan in his new position. When you're assembling an outdoor grill, do you follow the instructions completely, or do you reinterpret what they tell you to do? Well, it probably explains why you wound up with extra parts and the bottom fell out when you dropped the rack of ribs on it. Well, sadly, the same has been done with what many consider to be the greatest foundational document in the history of the world. Of course, I'm talking about the U.S. Constitution. Ratified in 1788, U.S. Constitution created a framework for our republic while still offering a method to maintain its effectiveness through the amendment process. Yet that's not good enough for a growing number of people. Some seek to, here's that word again, reinterpret the original intent, while others, including Congress even, choose to surrender their role and responsibilities that the Constitution gives specifically to them. With us now to discuss the importance and the value of the U.S. Constitution and the dangers being created via the way the document is being treated is research fellow with the Independent Institute and author of the upcoming book being released this week, The Independent Guide to the Constitution, William Watkins. How are you today, Bill?
Chris, it is great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy this book is around because for the layperson and with an amazing amount of effectiveness yet brevity, you have brought, I think, the clearest understanding of the importance of the U.S. Constitution. I do want to mention the Independent Institute website is independent.org, and there's a whole host of fantastic information that you can gain from the work that they do, and you will benefit from it. Believe me, you obviously saw a concern, a problem, define it as you will, that brought about your book. Talk about what you were seeing and why you felt the need to do this work.
Well, what really motivated me with this book is that, unfortunately, our Constitution is taking more of a backseat to our form of government and how our representatives, our justices on the Supreme Court, etc., pretty much do what they see as just in the best interest of a particular policy and don't care what the fundamental law says. And this is the people's fundamental law, and to disregard it like that, maybe some of the policies will be good, but that sure does open up the opportunity to harm individual liberty, to harm our corporate rights in our states by ignoring the limits set in our fundamental law.
When we say, you said the word people, has we the people gone from we the people of the states and the many, has that gone from that to we the people who are chosen to be elected and are the minority, but we have the power?
That's a great question. People have to understand that our Constitution, our whole revolution, upended this idea that governors were the masters and the people were the servants. In our system, it's the other way around. The people are the principals or the masters, and those who serve in government are our servants or agents. That is a glory of the American Revolution and Articles of Confederation, the Constitution. But what it appears is has happened over the years is our governors have exalted themselves again and forgotten who is really in charge.
This might be challenging to do verbally, but for you listening, try to envision that pie chart. When you're talking percentages, a certain color will be that segment of the pie, and then so on and so forth until the pie is filled out. So with that concept in mind, Bill, what would the pie chart be with the original intent of the Constitution, federal versus state, and what has it drifted into becoming in the present day?
Well, Madison tells us in the Federalist Papers, and not just Madison, multiple friends of the Constitution in the ratification debates say that the powers of the new federal government would operate only on external matters such as war, diplomacy, that type thing, of course, foreign commerce. Everything else, the states would be as independent nations governing themselves. You look at that pie chart today, there's no way you can see any limits on the federal government to just external matters. They govern everything from, local poor relief to local schools. It's a system way out of whack.
And the reason backing up what Madison's intent was, along with other framers, obviously, if that wasn't their intent, why do we have the 10th Amendment then?
No, that's right. The Anti-Federalist and the state ratification conventions were a little concerned that some of the clauses in the Constitution could be misinterpreted or used to hurt the people in the states. And that 10th Amendment affirms that, hey, what is given, and that's it. Everything else is retained. That proves that the Federalists, as they made their ratification arguments, weren't really trying to establish a huge centralized government. They say in the 10th Amendment, no, we agree with you. We just want these extra powers, a little bit more effectiveness to do a few other things, but that's not turned out that way.
So William Watkins, who is a research fellow with the Independent Institute, author of the upcoming book coming out this week, The Independent Guide to the Constitution. Independent.org is the website for the Independent Institute, and you are listening to Issues and Ideas. Makes sense to understand that part of the federal power is to make money because the government spends, it has to have income in order to stay out of debt. Nice theory. We've seen how that got blown to hell. But anyway, and let's bring this into the here and now to help people listening understand. We're all waiting to see what the U.S. Supreme Court decides on the Trump tariff policy. If you read the Constitution, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, why are we having this delay in even the discussion? It seems relatively clear who's got the tariff power, and most people, I think, are saying it's not where the tariff power is resting with right now.
Yeah, it's Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to lay and collect duties, imposts, excises, to tax, essentially. One of the defects of the Articles of Confederation was that the Confederation Congress had to depend on requisitions from the states, essentially saying, pretty please, states, we need X amount of money to pay our debts and fund the government. Would you send it on? And many of them didn't, some for good reasons. In the wake of the Revolutionary War, economies were a wreck. Others maybe for not so good reasons. But we have this funding ability in Congress in the Constitution of 1787. The president, you look in Article 2, there's no taxing authority. He doesn't have the power to do that. I get the policy arguments that we should have a high tariff system to try to bring manufacturing back. That might be a good policy argument, but constitutionally, that's a call for Congress, not the executive.
So it'll be very interesting to see what the Supreme Court comes up with. I've heard through various sources around about the third week of February is when they're planning to come out with that ruling, so we'll see if that timetable holds true. Another topic of conversation, and this is a point of debate, too, between the 5th and the 14th Amendment, the idea of due process. Is due process, according to the original intent of the Constitution, available to all whose feet are on U.S. soil, whether or not they're a citizen or not.
Right. Well, the whole idea of due process is essentially that you have a right not to be deprived of life, liberty, or property absent proceeding in court by the law of the land, that you should get that process which is due. Obviously, part of that is Congress can set by statute what processes are due, whether you're an alien, whether you're citizen, etc. There. So that is partly a congressional function in our immigration and nationality statutes. But also with the 14th Amendment, we have nationalized citizenship established. We also have references to persons, but there's no problem give everyone having due process by the law of the land. Just let Congress pass intelligible statutes dealing with alien friends and alien enemies, and what procedures should be followed in removing or granting citizenship, etc.
Because I bring that point up because I've heard people say or claim to state that the 14th Amendment reduces the level of due process established by the 5th Amendment.
No. The 14th Amendment had a very narrow purpose, which was to ensure that the newly freed slaves, the freedmen, were entitled to the same rights and privileges as white citizens, that they could make contracts, that they could sue in court, etc. That was the 14th Amendment essentially constitutionalized the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and to blow it into anything else historically is an error.
As you well prove with your book, The Independent Guide to the Constitution, there's plenty of written evidence from the framers themselves, notes, communication, letters, and a whole host of factual information to base an understanding of original intent on. Why has the reinterpretation, or as you described, there's basically three interpretive traditions: the early strict construction, originalism, the 20th century modern originalism, and the worst of all in my mind, the living, breathing Constitution idea. What fed the watering down of the adherence to the original intent?
Well, I think you have in the 1980s and 90s and going forward, I love the Federalist Society, good group of scholars, but you get a group of alleged originalists who, to borrow an example, an apocryphal example, but it was alleged that medieval scholastics would argue about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, and this employed a lot of their time rather than other sounder pursuits. Same thing with originalism. Rather than just sticking to the good old originalism, the Jeffersonian strict construction that Madison, St. George Tucker, Jefferson, John Randolph, Nathaniel Macon used and argued for, I guess it's a publish or perish type world in academia. So we have all these new theories come up that, no, we can't just look at intent. We need to just look at the text and the original public meaning, divorced from the promises of the Federalists, and this, that, and the other. And so they divorce themselves from original intent, and then you look at what they're trying to peddle as original intent, and it's really just enlarging the powers of the federal government, kind of the same results you're going to have with living constitutionalism, which is just, hey, the Constitution's a living document. It can be updated as needed via interpretation by the courts, and we need that since we're not in horse and buggy days.
Or the age-old saying, I know how it reads, but here's what it means. Well, it means it means how it reads, because when you look at the original intent, it's a totally clear picture, and Bill demonstrates that with the Independent Guide to the Constitution. You can go cover to cover and become your own very own constitutional scholar But also, if a specific issue arises, your curiosity takes you to a certain point, you can go right to that article, that section, that clause, see the original intent, how we've drifted away, and a way to get back to the much-needed original intent. And it's all very easy to absorb. Bill doesn't talk over your head. He brings you into the history, which is always a fun thing to do and always a great foundation to stand on to understand exactly what the original intent was. Those are the key words. You can find out more about the Independent Institute, which Bill is a research fellow with at independent.org. Coming out this week, the Independent Guide to the Constitution. Bill Watkins, thank you so much for helping us remember the value, the importance of this document, and our duty to adhere to that original intent. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Imagine that you're in your favorite store. You see an employee that's having a problem putting something heavy on a shelf, so you help them out. Does that mean you're now an employee of that store? Will they pay you, give you benefits because of what you just did? Right, of course not. Sounds ridiculous. Yet this is a scenario that's playing out in law enforcement, as local law enforcement is receiving the same rights and protections that federal law enforcement has when it's called being cross-deputized. This is created a situation where someone who was unjustly imprisoned is being denied legal recourse against the local law enforcement who caused that to happen. Joining us to explore this case is Litigation Council with the new Civil Liberties Alliance, Casey Norman. How are you today, Casey?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
And to learn more about this case, along with the work of New Civil Liberties Alliance, ncla.org is the website. We have that at our homepage. I gave the superficial introduction to this case, but dig a little deeper. What came about that caused this dilemma that the NCLA is filing an amicus brief on?
Sure. So this case is about a lot of things, but I think at bottom it's really about accountability, as you just touched on. And I know we only have about 10 minutes, so I won't take you through all of the facts of this case. But in a nutshell, a St. Paul, Minnesota police officer, this is the defendant in the case, her name is Officer Waker. She essentially fabricated evidence and concocted this, far-reaching sex trafficking conspiracy that ultimately led to numerous innocent individuals being imprisoned or charged with involvement in this sex trafficking conspiracy, and then being put behind bars waiting. In this case, the petitioner, she was behind bars waiting eventually for her charges to be dropped because she was innocent, but she was imprisoned for 2 years, along with many other innocent people who ultimately were determined to be innocent. And it was found that this police officer had just made up this conspiracy and knowingly, implicated these innocent individuals. And the question really in this case is, what do you do about that? When you find that a law enforcement officer violates your rights, patently, without question, violated rights, is there a way to hold that officer accountable? And the complicating factor in this case really is that the officer in this case was cross-deputized, which means even though she was a state police officer, at the time of the misconduct, she'd also been cross-deputized with very limited federal authority as well, because she was assisting with a federal joint task force. And the problem here is that a lot of these courts are saying, because you are cross-deputized, you can no longer be held liable as a state actor, as a state police officer. And for a lot of people, in a lot of cases, really the only way to go after a bad actor, like a state law enforcement officer, is through Section 1983, which provides for a remedy against bad actors acting under state law. But these courts are kind of removing that remedy from a case like this, which is just egregious and kind of nonsensical.
The Supreme Court, I was reading in 2022, ruled it was Egbert versus Boule, I guess it's pronounced Boule, rendered damages, actions against federal officials largely unavailable to victims of constitutional violations. Does that ruling contain any clarification which keeps local law enforcement away from this beneficial position that federal law enforcement has?
Yes, I'm glad you brought up Egbert v. Boule. That's kind of the other side of this case. So for those listeners who aren't familiar, if a federal officer violates your constitutional rights, for instance, there used to be a remedy that you could pursue called a Bivens action. And Bivens was an old Supreme Court case that basically said, even though Congress hasn't specifically passed a law that says you can go after federal officers, this is an implied right that we as the Supreme Court are creating, and you can go after them if they violate your rights. But then the case that you just mentioned, Egbert v. Boole, that case severely limited and almost overruled Bivens. So basically, if your rights are violated by a federal law enforcement officer, you have very, very limited options for getting a remedy, getting a relief, even if the rights violation is just obvious and unquestionable. And so that's why this case is really important and interesting, because the courts are treating state and local police officers, like the officer in this case, as though they are purely federal officers. And because of the case you mentioned, Egbert v. Boole, if they're a purely federal officer, there's almost no way that a person is going to be able to, pursue relief and hold this individual accountable. It's really only state and local officers that you can hold accountable, which is why this issue is so important.
So when a local law enforcement is cross-deputized and doing cooperation efforts with the federal, so they're coming under that umbrella, does who is paying that local officer come into play with anything as far as the law is concerned? If I'm getting paid as a local officer, why am I not still a local officer?
Exactly. That is a very good question. And the fact of the matter is that, for instance, in this case, Officer Waker, the defendant, she's completely remained a state police officer. She's still being paid by the state, police department. She reported to, a state sergeant within the police department. She was completely 100% a state police officer. She maintained her position. And the only difference is that, part of her position was this supplemental federal authority to assist with the federal task force as well. But it's not as though these state police officers are suddenly being transformed or converted into federal agents. That's not at all the case. They're still state police officers, but they just have this, additional supplemental power and function as well.
So we're Casey Norman, who is Litigation Counsel with the new Civil Liberties Alliance, ncla.org, their website, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. Unless something has updated from the news I was able to find doing background, this local officer, is still gainfully employed, is she not?
Yes, it's actually incredible, but since the misconduct that was alleged in this case, I think she's actually been promoted. She's earning a six-figure salary, still working for the same police department, incredibly enough.
With the lower courts ruling as they have with this issue, how big are the roadblocks in front of what would be more common sense justice, certainly to the layperson, if not the courts themselves? How difficult is it, based upon what the lower courts have decided, to make better sense out of all this and put things more in a righteous way for civil rights to take the precedent rather than benefits of local law enforcement?
Yeah, basically what we're seeking in the Supreme Court is for the Supreme Court to do just that, to clarify that some of these lower courts are absolutely getting it wrong, and that what they're doing is just removing any hope of a remedy, any means of holding these bad actors accountable. And luckily, this isn't all courts. Only certain regions, only circuit courts of appeals have been holding in this way, which basically just says, if your rights are violated, tough luck, there's nothing you can do. But not all courts are ruling that way. So there's a big split among the courts, which is why we're really hopeful the Supreme Court will take this case and rule definitively, hey, this is wrong. There has to be a remedy when your rights are violated. These state police officers are still state police officers, so we're going to apply Section 1983, which is enacted specifically to hold bad actors who are acting under state law accountable. So I think that's the clearest, path to a fix of the situation that I can see at the moment.
I know the history of the Supreme Court is obviously voluminous, and that's the understatement. But has the court ruled on anything to this situation, anything a close cousin to it, that could be used as a means to say to the court, well, you've decided on this case, shouldn't that apply to that case?
Yeah, so I think what we argue in our amicus brief essentially is related to Section 1983, which is the civil rights law that Congress passed to act as a remedy in cases just like this, when state actors violate rights. And there's ample Supreme Court case law that holds that Section 1983 is supposed to be interpreted and applied very broadly. It's supposed to protect constitutional rights. in any situation where they're violated by someone who's using, to any degree, state authority or state law to back his bad actions. And I think in this case, we're dealing with a state police officer who in many ways was exercising her state police officer authority when she committed all of this misconduct. So, the mere fact that she was also federally cross-deputized at the time should not negate the fact that she was also acting under color of state law. And there is a remedy for that, which the Supreme Court has held in a number, like I said, in a number of other opinions.
Does the officer's misconduct play any role in this case as far as what the Supreme Court decides? Or is that something they have to be blind to and they're just looking at what's in front of them in the text of the law?
I think, misconduct definitely plays a role, because when you're looking at whether someone's rights were violated, whether there was a Fourth Amendment violation, you got to look, what did the officer do? What was their conduct? What was the context of the situation? So I think what courts should be doing is absolutely looking at the specifics of, the specific facts, the specific conduct, the details of their cross-deputization, what role were they actually playing in assisting a federal task force. That is what courts should be doing, and that's what we're hoping the Supreme Court is going to say as well, because it shouldn't just be, we're turning a blind eye to the facts and just looking at the federal authority under the cross-deputization agreement. It should be, the specific facts should play a major role.
And certainly I think we all want to see the best in fairness and civil rights for Ms. Mohammed, but is this the case too where, like it or not, we're going to have to see the legislative branch come into this and fine-tune the laws that are collectively creating the situation?
Honestly, that would help a lot. Like I mentioned when we were discussing Egbert v. Boole, that recent Supreme Court case, which really, really narrowed the possibility of getting relief from federal officers who commit violations of your rights. If Congress were to pass a law that's like Section 1983, but again, Section 1983 applies only to state actors and not federal. But if we could see an act from Congress that applies to federal actors, I think that would really, help ameliorate the situation. Because right now it's almost as though if you're a federal officer and also a bad actor who's violating rights, you're almost certainly going to be found immune from liability, which is not something that should be the case in our system of governance.
No, to say the least. Certainly a very interesting case, which sounds like it applies to an individual, but when you find the details out, if you go to ncla.org, the website for the new Civil Liberties Alliance, read the amicus brief in the background on this case, you'll find out that this decision, should the Supreme Court take it, is going to have some very far-reaching effects, hopefully for the much better versus the story that you heard in this specific instance. Again, the website for the new Civil Liberties Alliance, ncla.org. She is Litigation Counsel with the new Civil Liberties Alliance, Casey Norman. Casey, thanks for bringing this case to our attention. Certainly something worthy of support for doing what's right and protecting civil rights for all of us. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
The world around us is not a completely safe place. Hopefully you know this. Level of personal safety and survival you'll have in large part, frankly, depends on you. Truthfully, it's not as challenging as you might be thinking. Being aware, being prepared, being alert can make the difference between preventing something really bad from happening to you versus having to respond in some sort of directionless panic or maybe even fall prey to a dangerous situation. The next guest is here to provide you with the tactics you need to understand to increase your personal safety as well as your well-being. He's a retired Marine captain, also conducted and managed clandestine operations around the world for the CIA. His new book, Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World. Tim Beard, thanks for being here today, Tim.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you having me on.
Website, we do have it on our homepage too, timbeardauthor.com. Learn more about Look Twice, and more importantly, get a copy, because, Tim, what you bring to a quick forefront and understanding is we have the ability to control our well-being, our safety, and it's just a matter of looking at something else other than the screen of our smartphone as we're transgressing through the world on our day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And I want to mention also, I retired from CIA. I was in the Marines first and CIA second, so I didn't want to mislead somebody by saying the wrong thing there. But the thing was, yes, it comes down to being aware and being in the moment. One of the things I did with this book Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World. I developed 3 volumes. We'll focus on the first one here. What I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at all the lessons that I learned from my experiences around the globe over the course of my career and boil them down for just regular, everyday people, stuff that they could do in this increasingly dangerous world that they could use to keep they and their loved ones safe. And a lot of it comes back to planning, as the stuff you've touched on. Comes back to awareness and being in the moment. You touched on something that was great, and it's easy to do. First piece of advice: take your head out of your cell phone. When you're exposed on the street, it's a very simple thing, but it's amazingly hard for a lot of folks to execute that. If you're walking down the street, you're exposed. You are exposed to a potential adversary who may not have your best interests at heart. You have just taken away some of your senses by immersing yourself and staring at your cell phone. Somebody can come right up next to you. They have proximity to you, and they can do what they want, and you won't recognize until it's too late. Same thing with headphones or earbuds. You got to take them off when you're exposed and out on the street, because if you don't, then what happens is you've given up your sense of hearing, and somebody can come right up to you. Could you imagine playing football or basketball while you're staring at your phone or you're wearing headphones?
Well, you'll have a long hospital stay.
Wouldn't work very well. So be aware and be in the moment. If you need to use your cell phone, because that's a fact of life these days, go into a location where I'll term it a hard point. And I define some. I don't use a lot of terms in the book, but there are some I define. A hard point is basically a place where you're safer. For example, you're separated physically from somebody who is a potential adversary. You're not walking down the street. You're in a hospital. You're in a local police precinct. You're in a commercial enterprise, a store, a shopping mall where there's a lot of people around, where you're not isolated and alone, where you can call for help, and where you're somewhat removed, possibly not even observable if you're inside a coffee shop in the back. Somebody on the street can't see you. That's generally a hard point. That's a place where you can use your phone. Pop into a coffee shop. Pop into a grocery store. Go use your phone in there, but not when you're on the street. Those are just a couple quick tips off the top of my head.
I think it's very important to note, too, that a person does not need to hide or go out of circulation for safety. We all have to be a part of the world. We all have to have a life and to live. And again, personal experience on my part, doing what I do and been doing for a lot of years, I know it's shocking to believe, but not everyone has found my work to be stellar and something they approve of. So I've gotten threats over the time. And what I learned real fast was get out of routines. Times you go to a place, paths you go to a place, to vary the routine to make it more difficult or frustrate the person who might want to get at you.
Chris, that's great advice. Everybody makes patterns. Everybody. The thing is, you need to be aware of your patterns. That means, what time do you get up? When do you go to sleep? When do you eat? Do you go out to brunch every Sunday morning with your friends at the same place? That's a great place for somebody, if they know what we call your pattern of life, that's a great place for them to pick you up. Especially, and this applies to some of your audience. Say, for example, they have a partner, a former spouse, somebody like that, where they're trying, former boyfriend, girlfriend, and they don't want to be found because that person knows, hey, every Friday night they're at, the local comedy club. They're going to be able to pick them up there, and that could lead to an altercation. It could lead to, I just want to talk. Well, sometimes that degrades from there, as we all know. So changing your patterns, even if it's by, for example, the time you go to work, maybe change it by 15 minutes. Go to work 15 minutes early one day. Go to work 10 minutes late another day. Just a little bit. I can tell you from having been involved in the things I've been involved in over my career, when I'm standing someplace watching something, it is very unnerving when this is from, we'll call it from the criminal's perspective or the adversary's perspective. If they're watching you and there's some place that they're not really supposed to be and they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, it starts to feel like 1,000-pound weight on your shoulders when you're doing that. Obviously, I was doing stuff for the U.S. government. but you think that everyone's looking at you. You start to feel very uneasy. And 15 minutes when you're in that situation is a long time. So if you change your pattern just a few minutes or change where you go to, you're going to throw people off. You make yourself into a much harder target. And a lot of times the adversaries will look for soft targets. They may just move to somebody else.
So Tim Beard in his book, Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World, timbeardauthor.com, the website, and you are listening to Issues and Ideas. You mentioned about going into a place to make use of your cell phone, get out of Dodge, get back into a level of safety. How important is it to know if something starts to happen, how to get out of a place? Because not always the way you came in is not always going to be the way you're going to be able to get back out.
Sure. Very, very true. If you're in a coffee shop, for example, most of those places, especially if it's a local one, you want to learn about the places that you tend to go to in your neighborhood. You're obviously going to learn about your place of work. You spend a lot of time there. You should know where the exits are. You should know a lot about that. Your home, you need to know and this is what we call a baseline. You need to have a baseline for what's normal around the outside of your home. Hey, that guy, yeah, he's always down the street there, or that car's parked there all the time. Sure, that's a friend of so-and-so, that brown car, we see that all the time. That's normal. But then when you see a car outside and there's two guys in there and you look out your window an hour later and they're still sitting there and they seem to be paying a lot of attention about your place, that's a sign that deviates from what's normal from your baseline. It warrants further investigation. You want to know what's normal when you go to the shopping mall. Is it normal to see people doing this kind of activity? If it's not, it may be time to leave now. You want to mitigate risk. That's a major theme of my book series, is you mitigate risk by getting ahead of stuff. You plan. Plans fall apart. Was it Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
That's true. But the thing is, at least you have a plan, something to deviate. You can go back to your plan. You may have to deviate from it, but you at least have an idea of what you're going to do. There's something we talk about, and I talk about in the books. Everyone has basically, I'll call it a hard drive in their brain, where you write stuff to it. So if you've never thought about something that you don't want to think about, like workplace violence, for example, you haven't written anything to that hard drive in your brain. You want to think through stuff when things are calm. You want to think through stuff before you have an adrenaline dump in your body, which can lead to poor decision-making and confused thoughts. That's just physiology. You want to think about, hey, what happens if something goes wrong at work? DHS teaches run, hide, fight. I talk about it in the book. That's a basic thing you can do. If you're at work and something goes wrong, there's some kind of a situation where you need to leave because it's escalating to violence. You want to know where you're going to run to. Think about it before it happens. Can you get out of the building? Where are you going to run to? Down the street? To a business? Is that business open all the time, or are they closed on Sundays and you happen to be at work doing overtime? You need to think about things like that. Know where you're going to go and make sure you're out of observation and that also you're protected. I've got to say this in this modern world. You're protected from the effects of gunfire, which is an all too frequent occurrence. So you want to be behind not drywall. You want to be behind a building, behind very thick concrete. Cars don't stop bullets real well unless you're hiding behind the wheels, not the tires, the wheels. Unlike the movies, bullets go right through car doors. People don't realize that either. But the second piece for your workplace, we talk about hiding. Most people, when they're a kid, they play hide and seek. Well, as an adult, with real serious terms, if you're in your place of work, you need to have 3, 4, 5 really good hiding places that you can go to, that you pick when your mind is clear and everything's calm. So you know if you can't leave because something's happening, where can you go and hide? You've already got a couple places picked out. That's just smart. It's planning. You may have to adjust, but it gives you something you're writing to that hard drive in your brain. And the final thing, if you get cornered and whoever the adversary is comes in and starts doing their thing, you may have to fight, Most people don't want to do that. Some people they're not going to be very good at that. But fight like your life depends on it, because it does. That's just a quick thumbnail sketch of what to do about your workplace. And I go into a lot of depth across all these facets of your life in the book series.
Indeed, Tim does, from the workplace to the home to the steps that you do that you might be thinking are just ordinary and innocent, but stopping those activities can make a big difference in increasing your personal safety, public places, and more importantly, how to stay safe without having to live in fear. That's the big difference, I think.
100%.
Tim gives to you.
You don't have to be paranoid. Yeah.
And not to simplify Tim's work, but it comes down to two words, I think, put together easy to remember. Be aware, make sure you prepare. And what you'll gain from Tim's book is going to go a long way with making your life a lot more safe, and those around you too, especially if you're a parent with kids, because we talked about routines and kids. That's what child predators like to look forward to, because it makes the grabs a lot easier. And again, not to scare you, but to educate you and make you more aware. That's what Tim does with his book, Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World. TimBeardAuthor.com. Tim, thank you for doing this work, because it's helping people understand the control and the power they have for their lives. They're not meant to be victims. They're meant to be strong in the world that might not be always with them, but it doesn't have to be, they don't have to fall to it either. So thanks for the work and for being here today.
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
At the beginning of the show today, I talked about the many lies and conspiracies being thrown around about Alex Pretti and how they're being so eagerly embraced. This, of course, is the work of Satan, and those who commit these actions do so with his approval. Jesus tells us this in John chapter 8, verse 44, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it." Add to that how so many are actually mocking and even laughing about the deaths of Alex Pretti, and before that, Renee Nicole Goodbye ICE officers. Loss of the life of someone who never did harm to others is being joked about, actually joked about, with the laughing emoji or some insipid meme that's based on a lie. Is this a sign of the last days that we read about in so many parts of the Bible? Well, here's what we find in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. "Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons." Many of those memes bounce around social media made the claim that Alex Pretti was some flamboyant transsexual or cross-dresser. Well, those photos were actually of a man named Kyle Wagner. He also lives in Minneapolis and is an Antifa supporter, but the people who were spreading this false narrative about Alex Pretti were doing so in order to say that this person, because they were different and they didn't approve of, was a bad person whose life was worth less than others. I'm of the belief that if you ask the person doing this, whether they're a true, devout Christian, they would say quickly and strongly, they would reply that, yes, they are. Well, that's so. I think their Bibles must be missing John chapter 13, verse 34. That's where Jesus gives us this instruction. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another." We are not to place love of ourselves as a top priority. We are to show love for others. When we do that, we show the love of God. It's not us who are to or will judge others. Judgment seat of Christ is called that for a very important specific reason. Here's how 1 John chapter 4, verse 16 explains this. "We have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him." Getting back to the ways that lies are being spread, is it done with long, detailed explanations, quote-unquote, almost a manifesto type of way? Well, occasionally, but rarely. Lies are most often spread by, memes. We just love those memes, don't we, which make use of really as few as 3 or 4 words. And why so few words? Is truth that easy to share? No. But lies, aimed at those seeking confirmation for their ignorance, that's easy to share. Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, Verse 18 writes this, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart. Those who embrace the lies that comfort them have given a deaf ear, certainly to what Proverbs chapter 8, verse 5 instructs, O you simple ones, understand prudence, and you fools, be of an understanding heart. As Christians, we are not supposed to bring lies into the world and feed the fire of Satan. The last days are indeed approaching. It's vital to worship God with nothing but truth. Here's how Jesus addresses this. Let's go to John chapter 4, verse 23. But the hour is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. Now, how do we know when the truth is in front of us? Are there ways we can keep ourselves from starting or spreading intentionally, unintentionally, the lies? Well, thank God that we have a helper for all that, the Holy Spirit. Here's how Jesus explains this in John chapter 16, verse 13. However, when he, the Spirit of truth, has come, he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears he will speak, and he will tell you things to come. So, how are we as Christians supposed to put down the lies and protect the innocent from them? Well, God gives us plenty of instruction with his word. Jesus in Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17, reminds us of how we are the body of the church, with Jesus, of course, as the head, and the battle is not ours alone. Reading here, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. We're not to give cover to those who lie either. We're told to basically call them out as a warning for others. Reading here from Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. The Word of God, of course, is the word of truth. Any and every false word will be revealed by his word. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. For the word of God is living and powerful, and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Titus chapter 2, verse 15 also reminds us of the authority by which we take this action against lies. Speak these things, exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no one despise you. Finally, why do we even need to take on this battle? Why not just let the liars go lie and meet their inevitable dark destiny? James in James chapter 5, verse 19 and 20 has the answer to those questions. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Don't forget to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. We have more information about the guests who joined us here on the show today. Also updated the classic conversation in light of all things that we're seeing today. Go back to 2018, a talk I had with Rennie Davis. That name doesn't ring a bell with you. The group he was part of certainly will. The Chicago 7. You remember. You'll find that and a lot more at issuesandideasradio.com. Always thankful and grateful for your time and your attention. Very special and important to us. And we'll be back with you this time next week for our next edition of Issues and Ideas.